Josh, there have been reports that the Department of Homeland Security and ICE have begun removal operations, I think what they're calling it, others are calling it raids, against Central American families who came across the border illegally over the past year and a half. And some of the reports suggest that families, the Los Angeles Times quoted a woman saying that her family in Georgia, ICE agents came in, looked room to room, woke up her own kids, they were shaking with fear. I'm wondering if the administration can confirm that those operations have begun, and whether the White House has had input directly with DHS about how those operations should be handled, and whether there are any concerns about striking fear into the communities, including those who may be here legally, living with some of these other folks as these are carried out.
David, for individual operations, I'd refer you to the Department of Homeland Security, and they can discuss with you individual operations that were carried out. What I can tell you is that the Department of Homeland Security has prioritized the cases of recent arrivals, individuals who recently crossed the border into the United States without proper documentation. And those, again, based on public statements, including a statement that was recently issued by the Secretary of Homeland Security, were the nature of the operations that were carried out over the last several days. This is consistent with the kinds of priorities that the President himself has talked about, that our enforcement efforts need to be focused on deporting felons, not families, and with a particular focus on individuals who have only recently crossed the border. But in general, I guess for these individual actions, I'd have to refer to the Department of Homeland Security.
The broader operation has begun.
Well, I'm actually pointing to the statement from the Secretary of Homeland Security that has indicated that some operations have taken place that have been focused on deporting individuals who've recently crossed the border, and that is consistent with the kinds of enforcement priorities that the President and the Secretary of Homeland Security discussed more than a year ago when the President announced a set of executive actions related to immigration reform.
The White House, including the President himself, talked at all about, with the Department of Homeland Security, about sort of the way these operations are conducted and the tone that they're taking with, in the way that they look for the immigrants and round them up.
Well, obviously, in terms of setting policy, the White House and the Department of Homeland Security have had discussions about some of these matters, but ultimately when it comes to enforcement issues, those are decisions that are made by law enforcement professionals, and that's what the Department of Homeland Security has been engaged in.
A sense from the Department of Homeland Security that some of these operations were prompted by the sense that the number of migrants coming from Central America has ticked up over the past few months again, after some success, certainly at the height of the sort of the issue over a year ago. Was there also concern at the White House and other places about the discussions about from the Republicans on the campaign trail and elsewhere about securing the southern border, but also worries about terrorism and others coming to the country illegally? Was that part of the motivation here?
I can assure you that politics did not factor in these kinds of enforcement decisions, and in fact, I think it does warrant mentioning that in fiscal year 2015, the number of apprehensions by the U.S. Border Patrol of those attempting to cross our southern border illegally decreased when it's actually the lowest number of apprehensions on the southern border since 1972. That is an indication that our borders are certainly more secure than they've been in quite some time, and that is thanks to a significant investment that this administration has made in border security. There's more that we could have done when it comes to border security had Republicans in Congress not blocked an historic investment in border security. And it is also an indication that some of the other work that we've done that's been focused on Central America has yielded some fruit in stemming the tide of migrants from Central America to the United States.
Last question on this.
Yeah.
I wonder if the White House sensed, do you expect there were over 100,000 of these families that came across, I think, in 2014 alone. Not all of the cases have been decided. Not all will be ordered to be returned to their countries. A similar number of unaccompanied minors came across last year and again this year. I'm wondering if the White House believes these raids these efforts will continue throughout this year, whether there's estimated cost of this kind of operation, and whether the administration believes when you talk about focusing your resources on felons and others, that this also can be done at the same time. You're also looking for those other felons and those who've had other misdemeanors.
Yeah. Well, listen, there is a due process here, right? So there is a process by which people have to are evaluated by they go through an immigration judicial proceeding, and the individuals who are who are the targets of some of these efforts were the subject of final orders of removal. In each case, the individuals exhausted appropriate legal remedies, including questions about whether or not they could qualify for some form of humanitarian relief. So there is a judicial process and a legal due process that the administration is committed to following. But for people who are considering, we had this, a lot of these discussions, 18 months ago. For people who are considering, who are in this country and considering asking their kids to travel from Central America through Mexico to enter the United States illegally, we strongly encourage them to not do that. Primarily because that's a very dangerous journey. We have seen individuals engage in human trafficking, try to prey upon those who are most vulnerable, including children. And too many children have been victimized and even lost their lives when trying to make that journey. And so certainly people should take from this the understanding that the administration is quite serious when it comes to enforcing our immigration laws and in focusing our efforts on felons and recent border crossers. That continues to be a priority, but it will be done within the context of due process.
Following up on the ICE raids, this LA Times report out of Georgia detailed ICE agents entering a home without a warrant and taking a woman already under federal supervision into custody along with her 9-year-old son. Why are nonviolent migrants and children and families being targeted as a priority for deportation?
Rebecca, I'm not able to speak to any individual law enforcement action, so I'd encourage you to check with DHS or even ICE on that particular incident. What I can tell you more broadly is that the enforcement priorities that have been laid out by the administration are concentrating our efforts to deport felons, not families, and to prioritize the case of recent border crossers. The individuals who were the targets of these efforts were subject to final orders of removal by an immigration court, and their appropriate legal remedies that included claims for asylum or humanitarian relief had been exhausted. That's ultimately what it means to enforce the law. For how that is applied in these individual cases, I'd encourage you to check with the Department of Homeland Security.